In the dusty archives of the early 20th century Canadian police lies a chilling confession from a hunter whose mind was consumed by an ancient forest spirit. This is a grim tale of an unnatural, primal hunger that drove a man to mercilessly tear apart his family amidst the snow-covered, utterly silent Black Taiga. Algonquin shamans for centuries guarded the secret of a chthonic entity that possesses a weakened mind at the sight of the first drop of warm blood on fresh snow. This is not a mental disorder from isolation, but a real, tangible curse that still slumbers in the northern forests today, patiently awaiting its victim. Ancient oral traditions of the Great Lakes tribes describe the Wendigo as the embodiment of winter itself, merciless and utterly indifferent to any human life. The first sure sign of the creature's approach is a sharp drop in temperature and a sudden, nauseating smell of decaying flesh in the crystal-clear, frosty air. The true form of this ancient spirit is truly terrifying. Survivor accounts describe an unnaturally tall, emaciated silhouette, reduced to a skeleton tightly covered in skin. Its ashen gray, deeply frostbitten flesh hangs in gruesome tatters, exposing dead bones, and every movement is accompanied by a dull crunch of joints. The monster's head is crowned with broken antlers resting on a bare deer skull, devoid of any flesh. In its empty, bottomless eye sockets, a yellow, cold, sepulchral light continuously smolders, piercing the night's darkness. This unblinking gaze paralyzes the victim, stripping them of their last vestiges of sanity and will. According to ancient indigenous chronicles, the Wendigo's lips are always gnawed to blood and covered with a black crust. In fits of its endless, maddening hunger, it frantically devours its own flesh, unable to sate itself. This is an eternal curse, bringing it only endless pain. The chthonic spirit possesses a frightening, mystical ability to flawlessly imitate the voices of loved ones. Through the howling blizzard, it calls its victims by name, luring lost travelers deeper and deeper into the impassable dark thicket, from which no one has ever returned alive. There is a strict shamanic taboo that absolutely forbids uttering the true name of this creature during the long winter months. Elders believe that a single spoken word can attract its attention, drawing icy death directly to the doorstep of your warm, defenseless dwelling. Despite its extreme visual emaciation, the ice monster possesses truly colossal, inhuman physical strength. Ancient grimoires state that in a fit of rage, this creature can easily uproot ancient pines and tear apart the largest bears. The Wendigo is inextricably and mystically linked to the element of cold itself. It can, at will, control fierce snowstorms, instantly covering its bloody tracks from pursuers. Where it treads, the earth freezes solid, and all living things irrevocably turn to ice. The gruesome process of a human transforming into an ice demon begins precisely at the moment when a traveler, driven mad by hunger, voluntarily consumes human flesh. With the first swallowed piece of flesh, their human soul dies forever, giving way to a primal, dark, and insatiable chthonic evil. The first stage of this terrible possession is the so-called ice fever. An internal heat burns the victim alive, causing them in a delirium to tear off all their clothes in the bitter cold. The skin blackens, and the heart begins to beat to the rhythm of icy emptiness. As new victims are consumed, the infected's growth proportionally increases. Each life eaten makes its body more gigantic, and its hunger even more insatiable. The creature is physically unable to be sated, for its stomach grows with every swallowed drop of another's blood. According to secret Jesuit records, the only vulnerable point of this immortal chthonic creature is its heart. It is entirely composed of pure, unmelting black ice. Only by piercing this cursed organ can one attempt to stop the eternal hunger that relentlessly devours all living things in its path. To protect themselves from the omnipresent spirit, the Cree indigenous people traditionally used complex occult rituals. To mask their scent from the creature, they thickly smeared their naked bodies with bear fat mixed with sacred ash from fires in which the bones of sacrificed animals were burned. Ancient amulets, skillfully carved from raven bones, played a special, sacred role in protection. These artifacts were hung around the settlement. Their mystical power was intended to ward off the demon's dead, icy gaze from human dwellings, concealing the aura of living people in a dense veil of shadows. During long, endless winter nights inside the wigwam, it was vitally important to maintain an unextinguished sacred fire. It was believed that its warm, living light physically burned the spawn of darkness. If the flame extinguished even for a moment, the Wendigo would immediately step out of the gloom directly to your hearth. Experienced shamans entered a deep, controlled trance to track unseen paths in the subtle, ethereal world. It is along these frozen astral routes that the Wendigo silently creeps towards human settlements, weaving its webs of primal fear and an approaching blizzard. The rite of sacred purification of desecrated hunting grounds required a complex ritual. The air was filled with thick, suffocating smoke from burning bitter wormwood and sacred sweetgrass to burn out the very corruption of the ice demon, which had forever permeated the dead, frozen soil of the Taiga. This chthonic spirit can imperceptibly penetrate the defenseless dreams of sleeping hunters. It sends them obsessive, maddening visions featuring bleeding, still warm, fresh meat, awakening the darkest, animalistic thirst in their subconscious. The physical approach of the creature is always accompanied by terrifying, bone-chilling sounds. First, there is the deafening crack of ancient trees breaking, and then the ominous whistle of the piercing, icy wind howling directly through the exposed bare ribs of this gruesome embodiment of absolute hunger. The creature's claws, hard and sharp as primal flint, possess truly terrifying power. They can easily tear through the thickest bear hides and human flesh as if it were thin, fragile parchment, leaving the victim no chance of escape. According to ancient indigenous legends and occult grimoires darkened by time, the Wendigo never sleeps. It eternally roams the boundless, snow-covered wastes, condemned to endless wandering in search of fresh human blood and flesh to sate its hunger. Even a direct, visual contact with the ice demon poses a mortal threat. Its bottomless, dead gaze can literally freeze the blood in your veins, instantly paralyzing the victim's will and turning a living person into submissive, silent prey for the darkness. Sled dogs are the first to sense the invisible presence of this chthonic evil in the forest. They begin to whine pitifully, tuck their tails, and categorically refuse to go forward, instinctively understanding that ahead awaits an encounter with something beyond comprehension. The Wendigo's tracks, left on deep snow, appear utterly unnatural and frightening. They are completely devoid of heel prints, leaving behind only deep, ragged furrows from frost-bitten, blood-caked fingers that scrape across the icy crust of the northern taiga. To defeat the monster's icy heart, shamans secretly performed a special ritual. They created special, enchanted blades forged from pure silver or native copper, whose sacred nature could destroy the spirit's mystical shell and stop its eternal hunger. After the incredibly difficult killing of the monster, its cursed body had to be immediately dismembered. Each severed part was to be burned in a separate, specially prepared and consecrated fire, so as not to allow the dark entity to reassemble its physical form. The ashes of the burned forest spirit were under no circumstances to be left on the ground. They were to be scattered over the swift current of cold running water to finally sever the demon's connection with our world and exclude any possibility of its bloody rebirth. The brave hunter who dared to deliver the final fatal blow to the creature himself faced terrible danger. He risked becoming a new bearer of the dark curse, taking on the full weight of eternal, maddening hunger and gradually transforming into the next monster. In the grim history of the northern tribes, there are chilling accounts of the appearance of dark shamans. These madmen voluntarily allowed the ice spirit into their bodies, performing gruesome blood rituals to gain absolute, inhuman power and control over the harsh elements of the taiga. The terrible and inevitable price for such a sacred union was always the loss of one's own soul. The infected person underwent a gradual transformation into a mindless, eternally hungry killing machine, forever forgetting their name and losing the last remnants of fragile humanity. Victims who perished from the Wendigo's claws were always buried according to special, strict precautionary rules. Their limbs were tightly bound with thick sinew ropes so that the dead would not rise from their frozen graves as submissive, will-less servants of the ice monster, craving others' blood. A mere fleeting touch of this chthonic spirit acts like absolute frost. It instantly drains all living warmth from the human body, stopping the heartbeat and leaving behind only a fragile, empty, icy shell, devoid of the slightest spark of life. In the pale, cold moonlight, this grotesque creature can become practically invisible to the human eye. It masterfully blends with the long, distorted shadows of bare trees, transforming into an ethereal phantom that silently glides across the sparkling snow towards its intended victim. The Wendigo often hides its gruesome, blood-stained trophies and pieces of dead flesh high above the ground. It hangs them on the thick branches of ancient pines, creating a horrifying, bloody larder that serves as a chilling warning to all uninvited guests of this cursed forest. There is an incredibly deep, mystical connection between the activity of this sinister spirit and natural cycles. Its awakening always coincides with periods of the most brutal, merciless winter starvation for indigenous tribes, when despair and death literally hang in the frosty air of the dark northern taiga. In these dark, cursed places, even the slightest drop of blood from a killed animal can instantly provoke the awakening of the dormant ice evil. A crimson trail on white snow acts as an ancient summons, making the chthonic creature greedily inhale the frosty air with its torn, decaying nostrils. The tribal elders knew special, lingering, and monotonous songs designed to lull the spirit's vigilance and dull its eternal hunger until the spring thaw. These deep, guttural sounds echoed across the snow-covered plains, creating an invisible acoustic barrier against the impending gruesome death. At the borders of dangerous territories, indigenous people erected powerful protective totems, skillfully carved from red cedar trunks. Each such effigy, generously sprinkled with the warm blood of sacrificial animals, served as a mystical shield to ward off the insatiable creature and protect their settlement from its icy breath. Ancient legends say that if you look into the empty, bottomless eyes of the Wendigo, you can see the gruesome reflection of the endless torments of all the human souls it has consumed. This is not just a predator's gaze, but a gateway to an icy hell where doomed wanderers eternally moan. Sacred knowledge about the nature of this chthonic creature was always passed down only in whispers by a smoldering fire. Indigenous people believed that any loudly spoken word in the winter forest could be a direct invitation for darkness, bringing a curse upon the entire tribe. The grim geography of this ancient curse reliably encompasses the boundless, impassable coniferous forests of northern Canada and the cold, desolate lands of Minnesota. It is here, among ancient pines and deep snowdrifts, that the primal fear of a creature impervious to any earthly obstacles originated. On old, long-abandoned indigenous trails, hunters still find gruesomely dismembered carcasses of large animals. Bears and moose are torn in half with inhuman strength and left to rot on the black snow, for the monster kills them not for sustenance, but for its twisted pleasure. On yellowed French maps from the late 17th century, some remote northern territories were directly marked by cartographers as cursed lands of terrible cannibal demons. European explorers intuitively felt the oppressive aura of these places, placing warning signs to save their entourage from certain doom. Stern Jesuit missionaries, in their secret archives, were the first Europeans to document outbreaks of mass possession by this forest spirit. Their yellowed chronicles are full of genuine horror at the unknown chthonic force that easily broke the minds of even the most steadfast and righteous people. Their yellowed chronicles are full of genuine horror at the unknown chthonic force that easily broke the minds of even the most steadfast and righteous people. In the personal diaries of Father Paul Lejeune from 1636, the terrifying symptoms of ice madness among the indigenous people are described in detail. The priest shudderingly noted how the infected begged to be killed immediately before they began to greedily devour their own flesh. Deep in the Taiga, there are entire cursed valleys where thick tree trunks are unnaturally twisted by an unknown force, and birds never build their nests. In these dead zones, an absolute ringing silence reigns, broken only by the gruesome crunch of branches under the heavy steps of an invisible monster. Desperate gold prospectors during the northern gold rush repeatedly stumbled upon deep, dark caves whose floors were thickly strewn with gnawed human bones. On the frozen stone vaults, they found gruesome scratches from giant claws, left by the creature dragging its prey into the darkness. The sinister, desolate shores of Lake Winnipeg still hold grim memories of the bloody feasts of the creature lurking in the dense winter fog. Local old-timers swear that on the coldest nights, bone-chilling screams of its torn victims can still be heard from beyond the veil. Police archives carefully preserve the records of the historic trial of an indigenous man named Swift Runner, which took place in 1879. This grim case, whose investigation shocked the public, became the first documented instance of law confronting the phenomenon of human transformation into a possessed monster. Being an experienced, respected hunter, he mercilessly devoured his wife and children, despite being only a few miles from a large fort with abundant supplies. No rational hunger could explain this atrocity. His mind was completely consumed by the dark, chthonic essence of the Taiga. Eyewitnesses and witnesses at the trial shudderingly described his utterly empty, glassy stare, in which nothing human remained. He sat motionless, like a dead statue, only occasionally licking his cracked lips in anticipation of a new portion of raw, fresh meat. The harsh official verdict and subsequent public execution by hanging could not destroy the ancient entity that had taken root within him. Local shamans claimed that at the moment of death, the killer's body emitted a thick, foul smoke, and the liberated spirit simply returned to the frozen taiga. No less remarkable is the grim story of Jack Fiddler, a powerful indigenous shaman and the last known professional Wendigo hunter. Throughout his long life, he bore the heavy burden of protecting the tribes, tracking and mercilessly destroying those who succumbed to the call of the ice demon in harsh winters. This great shaman perfectly mastered ancient secret methods of identifying the possessed in the earliest stages of infection. He made the harsh decision and coldly destroyed them before they could commit their first murder and irrevocably transform into invulnerable chthonic monsters. In 1907, Canadian authorities, harshly denying any mysticism, put the elderly shaman on trial for a series of so-called ritual murders. The judicial system blindly trampled the ancient laws of the Taiga, completely failing to understand that Fiddler was the only shield holding back a primal, insatiable evil. Fiddler's tragic fate, choosing voluntary death instead of a cold prison cell, marked a terrible end to an era of open confrontation with the chthonic spirit. With the departure of the last great shaman, the boundless taiga finally plunged into darkness, leaving defenseless people alone with a primal, eternally hungry evil. Yellowed, strictly classified reports from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police are literally filled with gruesome cases of unexplained disappearances of entire families in remote winter forests. Officers dryly described empty cabins, carefully avoiding mention of giant mutilated tracks on fresh snow and torn dogs. Search parties repeatedly found absolutely empty trapper cabins. Kettles of meat stew were still boiling over hot fires. Heavy rifles hung on the walls, and massive oak doors were broken down with inhuman force from the inside into the impenetrable blizzard. Miraculously found diaries of missing hunters invariably break off with rambling, feverish entries. The trembling handwriting describes an unnaturally tall, ashen-pale silhouette pursuing them, standing motionless for hours behind the trees, driving the victim mad with its heavy, dead gaze from the pitch-black night. The grim locality, known on maps as Wendigo Lake, earned its truly sinister name not for rhetorical flourish. It was in these cursed lands that indigenous people for centuries recorded abnormally frequent appearances of the ice monster, turning the lake shores into a giant, invisible altar of eternal hunger. Local residents regularly made gruesome discoveries. Mutilated, completely disemboweled carcasses of large moose and deer were found abandoned on the highest peaks of giant ancient pines. This demonstration of colossal, primal power still defies any rational or scientific explanation by biologists. Harsh Canadian lumberjacks of the early 20th century massively abandoned their tools and flatly refused to work in certain impassable taiga squares. They complained of an inexplicable animal terror, a sharp smell of decay, and an oppressive, paralyzing feeling of being watched by an alien, invisible observer behind their backs. Sudden outbreaks of brutal, bloody psychoses in isolated winter camps were vainly attributed by official medicine of the time to common scurvy or claustrophobia. Doctors stubbornly ignored the fact that the maddened workers began to greedily devour the flesh of their still living comrades. In the deep, dusty, and strictly closed archives of the powerful Hudson's Bay Company, mentions of the disappearance of entire trading expeditions still lurk. In the sacred lands of the Algonquins, armed to the teeth European detachments vanished into the darkness, leaving nothing behind. If one carefully examines some genuine old daguerreotypes of those cursed places, gruesome anomalies can be discerned in the background. Among the bare, snow-covered trees hide blurred, disproportionately tall and emaciated figures whose empty eye sockets seem to gaze directly into the soul through the veil of time. Old prospectors whisper a legend about a cursed northern gold mine. When a sudden snow avalanche cut off the camp from the rest of the world, the maddened miners, hearing the call of the ice demon, stopped searching for gold and began methodically, with primal cruelty, to hunt each other. No reward, however generous in gold or weapons, could persuade indigenous guides to set foot in these cursed lands. Local tribes firmly knew whoever voluntarily crossed the invisible boundary of the Wendigo's hunting grounds would never return to the light of the sacred fire. Shamans claim that the specific, nauseating smell of frosty ozone mixed with stale cadaveric decay forever permeates the frozen soil where the Wendigo has trod. This abominable aura of death poisons the very earth, preventing vegetation from breaking through the black, lifeless, icy crust. Within these gruesome, anomalous zones of the taiga, the laws of physics cease to function. Compass needles begin to spin chaotically and wildly, and the ambient temperature can suddenly drop by several tens of degrees, instantly freezing the breath in one's chest and covering the skin with dead frost. Brave rescue teams, sent to follow the tracks of the missing, often returned empty-handed. At best, they found only torn, blood-soaked rags of warm clothing, frozen solid in thick ice amidst an utterly silent, indifferent white wilderness. Secret chronicles record a chilling case of a small northern settlement, all of whose inhabitants vanished without a trace in a single night. During an abnormally fierce blizzard, something ancient came from the thicket, leaving behind only the wide-open doors of the houses. To protect accidental travelers from certain, agonizing death, experienced shamans carved deep, sacred warning signs into the bark of old trees. These ancient runes marked the invisible boundary of cursed territories, crossing which meant voluntarily surrendering one's soul to the ice demon. Remarkably, even modern infrastructure, high-speed asphalt roads and high-voltage power lines, mystically bypass the ancient paths of the ice demon. Engineers, without realizing it, altered blueprints, submitting to an inexplicable, irrational fear of these cursed, God-forsaken wastelands. Periodic findings of undigested human teeth and silver ornaments in the stomachs of killed grizzly bears are still attributed by old-timers to the corrupting influence of this spirit. An animal that accidentally tasted desecrated flesh in Wendigo territory itself becomes an unwilling carrier of a part of its chthonic, primal hunger. Deep in the impassable taiga, nameless, moss-covered stone mounds are securely hidden. According to ancient oral traditions, it is beneath these heavy boulders that the still faintly pulsating, black, icy hearts of vanquished creatures are buried, patiently awaiting the hour when someone's warm blood will awaken them. The dusty archives of Canada's oldest psychiatric hospitals conceal dozens of terrifying case histories. In these yellowed charts, hidden from prying eyes, doctors despairingly wrote down an unofficial, chilling diagnosis: Wendigo psychosis, unable to explain the mystical nature of this dark, all-consuming madness. The gruesome transcripts of conversations with such patients are filled with their own desperate pleas. The possessed tearfully begged to be locked up as securely as possible, chained in heavy fetters, so that in a fit of uncontrollable primal hunger, they would not tear apart the orderlies into pieces of raw, still warm flesh. Official science for decades tried to hide the mystical, chthonic nature of these frightening transformations behind dry medical terms. Scientists piled up complex psychiatric concepts just to avoid admitting the obvious. An ancient, tangible forest spirit had entered the bodies of the unfortunate, whose presence breaks the laws of physics. However, hidden history remembers the bloody footprints of bare feet in the snow. These gruesome prints led from strictly guarded wards, broken open from the inside, directly into the dense, dark forest. Iron bars were torn out by the roots with the inhuman power that the curse grants its bearer. The ancient spirit of the taiga cannot be locked in a rigid steel cage or bound by heavy chains. Any attempts to explain its chthonic hunger through rational psychiatry are futile, for this otherworldly entity feeds not only on raw flesh, but also on your deep primal fear. If we brush the dust off ancient grimoires and treatises of other world cultures,
we will find truly frightening parallels. This chthonic archetype of eternal hunger and icy death is inextricably woven into the mythology of many peoples, as if all humanity has seen the same nightmare.
In Slavic mythology, for example, hides a dark winter hypostasis of the Leshy. This is not just a mischievous forest master, but a sinister, merciless spirit that deliberately confuses tracks in a blizzard and leads the doomed traveler to an agonizing death from bitter cold, sucking out their vital warmth. Similar to the Canadian ice demon, this Slavic spirit masterfully imitates the voices of loved ones. Through the howling blizzard, it reproduces the cries of frozen children or the screams of women calling for help, cunningly luring its victim deeper and deeper into the impassable, dark, and deadly cold thicket. Stern Scandinavian sagas shudderingly describe Draugr, monstrous animated corpses whose grim existence in icy burial mounds is sustained only by insatiable malice and eternal hunger. They wander through snowstorms, bringing doom to all living things, like northern counterparts of the cursed indigenous spirit. The black, frozen-through blood of these northern Draugr eerily echoes the concept of the unmelting, icy heart of the indigenous Wendigo. Both entities lack the warm spark of life, representing an absolute, concentrated embodiment of merciless winter, which ruthlessly consumes all warmth without a trace. Celtic folklore carefully, yet fearfully, preserves the memory of the Fomorians, chthonic, monstrous giants. These grotesque creatures emerged from the dark depths of the icy sea, bringing with them primal chaos, destruction, and endless winter, freezing the very earth beneath their heavy steps. In ancient Greek myths, we find the tragic story of King Erysichthon. For desecrating a sacred grove, the goddess Demeter inflicted upon him a gruesome curse, an eternal, maddening hunger that grew stronger the more food this cursed, doomed ruler consumed. Like the victim of the Taiga's icy curse, Erysichthon, driven mad by torment, eventually began to greedily devour his own flesh. Unable to be sated, he gnawed his body to the bone, demonstrating the same archetypal horror of self-destruction as the blood-gnawed lips of the Wendigo. Grim European legends of werewolves also have a deep, subconscious connection to forced cannibalism. During long, harsh, and hungry winters, when supplies dwindled, the fear that one's neighbor would turn into a bloodthirsty beast reflected the real threat of losing one's humanity. However, the classic werewolf still retains a dual, animalistic nature, succumbing to lunar cycles. The Wendigo, on the other hand, represents pure, unadulterated mystical horror, a chthonic void with nothing of the beast, only a cold, calculating, and infinitely cruel spirit of absolute consumption. The ancient Slavic goddess of winter and death, Morana, or Marena, brings with her bitter, freezing cold and black plague. Her icy breath stops rivers and kills crops, mercilessly draining life from nature, turning a flourishing world into a frozen, dead wasteland. Traditional spring rituals of burning Morana's effigy strikingly echo the shamanic rituals of the Algonquins. In both cultures, there is an urgent need to commit the physical shell of the winter spirit to fire and completely destroy it so that its dark essence cannot rise again from the dead ashes. In the harsh beliefs of the northern Inuit, there are tupilak, vengeful, bloodthirsty spirits. Dark sorcerers stitched them from the bones, sinews, and decaying flesh of dead animals, breathing black magic into this gruesome construct, intended to track and mercilessly devour the creator's enemies in the icy tundra. Even dusty medieval alchemical treatises of enlightened Europe briefly mention sinister demons of cold. These infernal entities, according to faded parchments, feed exclusively on human warmth and primal fear, freezing the blood of their victims and leaving behind only fragile, frost-covered shells.
The famous dark grimoire, The Lesser Key of Solomon, details powerful infernal entities capable of controlling ice and snowstorms. These demons can inflict animal madness upon people, forcing them to tear their own kind apart, which eerily accurately replicates the symptoms of the Wendigo curse.
The scorching sands of Arabian mythology conceal gruesome legends of ghouls, abominable creatures that tear open fresh graves. This frightening desert analog of forest cannibalism proves that the chthonic horror of devouring dead flesh lives everywhere, still haunting humanity far from snow-covered wastes. The ancient Slavic Karachun is a grim underground god of relentless frosts, mercilessly commanding packs of hungry wolves and deadly blizzards. His icy breath shackles rivers, and his heavy tread brings only death, reminiscent of the destructive natural power possessed by the Canadian ice demon. With his sinister presence, Karachun mercilessly shortens winter days and plunges the entire world into darkness, sucking out vital warmth. His oppressive aura acts exactly like the Wendigo's icy breath, transforming the surrounding space into a dead, utterly lifeless wasteland without a single glimmer of light. Ancient Tibetan mandalas frighteningly depict hungry spirits, pretas, in detail. Their throats are so narrow that they physically cannot pass food into their enormous bellies, condemning their existence to eternal torment. This curse of emaciation strikingly echoes the insatiable maw of the northern monster. The terrifying concept of eternal, utterly insatiable hunger as the ultimate karmic punishment proved universal for the dark corners of the subconscious worldwide. Regardless of the continent, ancient peoples instinctively felt the presence of this chthonic evil, whose sole desire is to consume the very spark of human life. In the sacred mythology of many indigenous tribes, the Owlman is invisibly present, a sinister winged harbinger of inevitable death. His deep, bone-chilling cry in the night often accompanies the imminent appearance of the ice demon, warning doomed hunters that their souls are already inscribed in the bloody harvest. Even the well-known European fairy tale of Hansel and Gretel is merely a slightly softened reflection of the real primal horror of cannibalism. In its hidden, grim layers, the same blood-curdling story is encoded about dark forces that lure children to satisfy an unnatural hunger. The bloody enigma of the Beast of Gévaudan still fuels grim occult theories that it was not just a giant wolf. Many researchers are convinced France was terrorized by a human whose mind was completely consumed by an evil spirit, incredibly similar to our Canadian ice demon. Strict rituals of classical Christian exorcism share a frightening number of common features with ancient shamanic practices of expelling the ice spirit. Both the Catholic priest and the old shaman wage an absolutely identical, arduous spiritual battle to tear the human soul from the merciless claws of black darkness. The sacred use of holy water against European devils finds its direct analog in the ritual application of molten silver against the Canadian monster. Both of these purifying elements are intended to literally burn the corruption from the infected flesh, causing the chthonic creature to writhe in unbearable pain and abandon its refuge. Secret Slavic rituals of night plowing around settlements created a powerful magical barrier to protect against cattle plague and evil winter spirits. Women harnessed themselves to a plow, drawing a deep furrow that served as an insurmountable boundary for any dark entity eager to bring death and hunger into homes. These deep earthen furrows performed the exact same sacred function as the protective circles of sacred ash scattered around Algonquin wigwams. They reliably sealed off the space from external intrusion, clearly signaling to the evil wandering in the darkness that there was nothing for it to feed on here. The mythological archetype of the merciless devourer, methodically destroying all life in its path, runs like a blood-red thread through every ancient religion on our planet. It is a universal embodiment of entropy, patiently waiting for the moment when a weakened world finally surrenders and allows ancient hunger to consume the remnants of light. The chilling image of the Wendigo is the absolute quintessence of the primal fear of a small, vulnerable human before boundless, merciless, and dead nature. It is the embodiment of that very moment when the dense taiga closes behind a traveler, cutting off all paths back and leaving them alone with the approaching cold. Completely different world cultures tried in their own ways to explain the gruesome psychosis of deep isolation, but they always did so through the prism of their most terrifying chthonic demons. Solitude in the ice inevitably breaks the mind, opening wide the doors to those dark forces that are not spoken of aloud. The ancient Norse Edda, in its runes, describes in detail fierce cannibal giants inhabiting the frozen, icy wastes of Jotunheimer, infinitely far from the warm world of humans. These colossal creatures are made of primordial frost and malice, eternally awaiting the hour to unleash their fury upon Midgard. The terrifying appearance of the Scandinavian ice giants, the Hrimthursar, strikingly resembles the hypertrophied, frostbitten figures of the possessed from the Canadian taiga. Their bluish, thick hoarfrost-covered flesh and empty, yellow-glowing eyes prove that different peoples saw the same evil in the darkness. But it was in the impassable forests of North America that this ancient myth acquired its most terrifying, frighteningly detailed, and tangible form. Indigenous shamans didn't just believe in an abstract spirit of winter. They knew precisely how it smelled, how its joints crunched, and how its black heart beat. The extremely harsh climatic conditions of the boundless northern taiga created a truly ideal environment for the curse. In these merciless, ice-bound lands, the line between a rational human and a wild beast blurs instantly, should a blizzard sweep away the last path to a warm, securely sheltered home hearth. Descending further south, we find the shamanic legends of the ancient Maya, who spoke in terror of Kamazats, a giant vampire bat. This nocturnal demon serves as a direct tropical analog to the ice spirit, similarly tearing apart its victims in the dark jungles and draining all living warmth. The Wendigo has long ceased to be merely a local indigenous myth, breaking free from its frozen reservations. Today, this image has transformed into a frightening quintessence of the primal global fear of agonizing, hungry death, which has slumbered for centuries in the darkest, unexplored corners of our subconscious. The mournful howls of the ice demon eerily intersect with grim European legends of the wild hunt. In these tales, spectral riders, piercing the night sky through fierce winter storms, mercilessly abduct the souls of unwary travelers who found themselves far from the saving warm home hearth. The gruesome, blood-chilling bark of the spectral hounds of the wild hunt sounds in absolute mystical unison with the howl of the piercing wind sweeping through the exposed ribs of the Canadian monster. It is a single, unending symphony of death, continuously resounding over the snow-covered world on the darkest nights. All these striking mythological coincidences are by no means accidental, as skeptics try to convince us. They directly point to a single, incredibly ancient source of black chthonic evil, which merely takes on different guises, adapting to the fears of those who dare to utter its name. The very name Wendigo has become a universal, sinister code of human destruction, understandable at the level of basic instincts to any people in the world. This word sounds like a death sentence, marking the moment when reason finally surrenders to bestial, utterly insatiable dark rage. Over time, this gruesome image began its frightening, inevitable transformation. From an external, tangible enemy lurking in the snow-covered forest, The Wendigo slowly but surely crossed into the phenomenon of mass culture, spreading its dead breath onto the pages of ancient tomes and then modern books. The first truly significant literary embodiment of the spirit was Algernon Blackwood's grim novella The Wendigo, published in 1910. This text became a kind of dark grimoire of a new era, first documenting the ancient curse on its yellowed paper pages. Blackwood, himself a very experienced hunter, brilliantly conveyed its dead, oppressive, maddening atmosphere of the calling horror of the wild. He didn't just describe a monster, he made the reader physically feel that hypnotic call, leading the victim into the impenetrable thicket. It was this outstanding book that forever changed the perception of the ancient myth, taking it far beyond the remote Taiga reservations. Blackwood planted this primal, chthonic fear into the unprepared minds of European readers, making them anxiously peer into dark forest expanses. This chilling image had a colossal, almost mystical influence on the work of H.P. Lovecraft and the formation of his famous chthonic pantheon. The master of horror unerringly recognized in the traditions of indigenous tribes that very cosmic, incomprehensible black void that drives weak humans mad. Lovecraft's elder god Ithaqua, known as the Windwalker, is a direct, completely undisguised heir to the Algonquin ice demon. This gigantic silhouette with eyes glowing in the darkness absorbed all the most terrifying aspects hidden in the dark tales of northern shamans. Like its indigenous progenitor, Ithaqua similarly strides across the night sky, freezing its victims into solid ice statues. It mercilessly abducts them directly into the roaring snowstorm, leaving only deep, inhuman tracks on the frozen ground. In the mid-20th century, the Wendigo even penetrated the pages of Marvel Comics, becoming one of the classic, virtually invincible monsters of that universe. The ancient spirit found its new abode, solidifying itself in the minds of millions of people, skillfully disguised as a fictional, drawn villain. However, in vibrant comics, this deep and complex image was greatly simplified, reduced to a huge white hairy giant. The essence lost its mystical, psychological multifacetedness, transforming into mere brute force, devoid of that primal, exquisite, and chilling shamanic horror. The true, full return to the dark, chthonic origins occurred in cinema through the grim, lingering aesthetic of the folk horror genre. Directors once again turned to primary sources, dusting off forgotten grimoires to show audiences the true, utterly undistorted face of this ice demon. The cult film Ravenous from 1999 perfectly, with frightening accuracy, conveys the very essence of the psychology of human flesh infection. This grim film immerses us in an atmosphere of absolute isolation, where primal hunger slowly but surely displaces everything human. This film brilliantly, without excessive rationalization, reveals the ancient shamanic concept of absorbing another's life force through the sacrilegious act of ritual cannibalism. The viewer sees firsthand how forbidden warm meat does not sate hunger, but only ignites a black, unquenchable, hellish flame within a person. In modern visual pop culture, the monster's appearance has undergone quite noticeable changes. Now, its most recognizable part has become a dead deer skull with empty eye sockets, which seems to have fused permanently with the frostbitten, emaciated, tightly stretched gray skin of a human neck. Historically, the Algonquin Indigenous people never described the Wendigo with massive antlers or an animal skull. This is a later but extremely effective Gothic overlay that perfectly fit into the dark mythology, making the image of the chthonic creature even more sinister, tangible, and frighteningly memorable. The influence of European medieval myths about the horned god and gruesome carved wooden shamanic masks mystically merged, Thus, the modern, chilling design of the creature was formed, which today relentlessly haunts us in nightmares and stares from dark cinema screens. It was this dead deer skull that made the image of the ice demon incredibly cinematic, recognizable, and frighteningly chthonic. It transformed into the perfect mask of primal horror, concealing behind its bony curves that very black, insatiable void that mercilessly devours lost human souls. The ancient myth became the central plot of many modern video games, such as the blood-chilling Until Dawn. There, unwary players are forced to confront the primal curse face to face, hiding from emaciated creatures whose presence is betrayed only by the crunch of frozen branches. The gruesome interactivity of digital worlds forces a person to experience this primal, will-paralyzing fear firsthand. You literally feel like defenseless prey in a dark, snow-covered forest, where every wrong step you take relentlessly attracts the attention of winter's eternally hungry offspring. The image of the merciless ice demon was actively and very successfully used in popular mystical TV series, including the cult Supernatural and the grim Hannibal. Directors masterfully wove the chthonic archetype into modern narratives, making the ancient curse come alive in the settings of our familiar world. In the series Hannibal, the silent black Wendigo, crowned with branched antlers, became a profound symbol of inner darkness and refined, frighteningly aestheticized cannibalism. This feathered, charcoal-black monster literally reflects the process of how a sophisticated human mind voluntarily surrenders to primal, carnivorous instinct. This is how the most important, fundamental transformation of the myth occurred. From an external, tangible enemy lurking in the snow-covered forest, the Wendigo transformed into an internal, invisible demon that patiently lives within each of us, awaiting its hour to break free. Our modern society of rampant consumption has given rise to a completely new philosophical term known as Wendigo capitalism. This is a frighteningly accurate metaphor, transplanting the curse of eternal hunger from the remote Canadian Taiga directly into soulless megacities, where everything is subservient to profit. Renowned researchers and sociologists use this grim concept to describe the insatiable, utterly self-destructive greed of giant transnational corporations. Like the ice spirit, they mercilessly drain all vital juices from the surrounding world, never feeling sated and leaving behind only a dead wasteland. Global ecological catastrophes, burned forests, and poisoned rivers are increasingly linked to the metaphorical awakening of this ancient spirit of destruction. The earth literally groans under the yoke of humanity's insatiable appetite, as if we have all at once been infected by that chilling taiga curse. Grim internet creepypastas and modern urban legends successfully revive ancient oral folklore, masterfully adapting it to the harsh realities of our digital age. Now, scary stories are passed not in whispers around a campfire, but through flickering monitor screens, penetrating the most remote corners of the network. The global network is literally overflowing with gruesome amateur videos capturing the piercing, inhuman howl of the monster in dark winter forests. In these blurry frames, an unnaturally tall silhouette often flashes through the veil of the blizzard, making blood run cold. The soulless algorithms of social networks only fuel this primal fear, spreading terrifying stories at the speed of a destructive forest fire. Like invisible spirit helpers, they deliver digital grimoires directly into our homes, ensuring that the ancient Algonquin curse finds more and more victims. Modern expeditions of desperate cryptozoologists do not abandon their persistent attempts to find some rational scientific basis for the existence of this chilling myth. They comb the forgotten trails of Minnesota and Canada, hoping to discover material traces of a creature whose breath brings only death and endless winter. They put forward bold theories that the Wendigo was mistaken for unknown relict hominids infected with a special mutated form of rabies. Allegedly, this disease, compounded by bitter cold, stripped them of their fur, distorted their body proportions, and drove them mad, pushing them to cannibalism. But absolutely any rational explanation inevitably crumbles to dust upon a real encounter with the mystical, unbearably oppressive aura of these dead, cursed places. Where compasses spin wildly and technology fails, dry science retreats in the face of undeniable chthonic evil. Meanwhile, the tourism business cynically and heartlessly exploits the sacred image of the monster, mass-producing its snarling skull on cheap souvenir merchandise. Various trinkets depicting the ice demon are sold at every turn, transforming ancient chthonic horror into a banal, meaningless commodity. Indigenous activists regularly and quite harshly protest against such crude commercialization of their sacred ancient fear. For them, the Wendigo is not a funny monster from comics, but a real, tangible threat whose name should not be uttered aloud for profit. The wise elders of the Great Lakes tribes still strictly observe the taboo on uttering the spirit's name during the winter months. They are firmly convinced that this curse has not gone away, and every carelessly spoken word can attract the attention of the entity slumbering in the snow-covered taiga. The gruesome appearance of the emaciated, unnaturally tall humanoid with ashen skin evokes a powerful psychological effect of the uncanny valley in the observer. Our brain desperately screams that before us is something merely imitating a human, but whose true essence is filled with primal, utterly alien darkness. Scientists suggest that the panic fear of such creatures is embedded in us at a deep genetic level. It is a basic instinct of self-preservation, inherited from distant ancestors who knew for sure, if you hear footsteps in the dark winter forest, death is already coming for you. Modern art exhibitions often explore the visual evolution of this ice demon, tracing the path from primitive cave paintings to sinister digital art. Art attempts to comprehend how this ancient image continues to transform, sending its chilling roots into our collective unconscious. Grim, dark ambient musical compositions masterfully recreate the otherworldly sounds of howling wind and the gruesome crunch of frozen bones. These heavy, oppressive rhythms seem to immerse the listener in a trance-like state, making them physically feel the icy breath of an invisible monster behind their back. Pop culture paradoxically saved this ancient indigenous myth from complete oblivion in our rapidly changing world. Widely disseminated in comics and video games, the image of the chthonic monster found new life, becoming an integral part of global folklore and taking root in the minds of millions. However, do not be deceived. Behind the mass-produced mask of a Hollywood monster still hides genuine, unadulterated chthonic horror. Those who try to turn an ancient curse into a cheap attraction forget that primal darkness does not tolerate mockery and is always ready to cruelly punish arrogant fools. Science fiction writers continue to use this sinister image to deeply explore the fragile boundaries of human morality in the most extreme conditions. They ask the frightening question, what is a civilized person willing to do when hunger drives them mad and hope for salvation fades? Every new film, every book written, only adds another glittering facet to the black ice crystal of this ancient curse. The myth grows, feeding on our fears, and with each new embodiment, it becomes more tangible, more hungry, and more merciless. Children in the cold northern states still scare each other around night campfires with stories of a tall, pale man hiding in the forest thicket. And although adults call these silly tales, they themselves try not to peer into the darkness too much. The myth adapted surprisingly easily to modernity. exchanging snow-covered indigenous wigwams for cars stuck in fierce blizzards on empty highways. Now, any random traveler whose navigator suddenly goes out on a deserted, snow-covered forest road can become a victim of the ice demon. But the very essence of this terrible curse has remained absolutely unchanged through long centuries. It is still the same maddening hunger, bone-chilling cold, and complete irreversible loss of human form, transforming a rational being into a merciless killing machine. The Wendigo will live and thrive as long as primal, unconscious fear of darkness and hunger exists in people's hearts. This chthonic evil feeds on our weakness, awaiting the moment when civilization cracks and ancient instincts once again take over. Returning to the oppressive atmosphere of the snow-covered, silent taiga, we realize with horror how powerless our modern civilization is in the face of eternity. All our technologies and supposed superiority over nature crumble to dust before the might of merciless winter and its dark offspring. The thick, continuously falling snow incredibly quickly covers any traces of human presence in these harsh, inhospitable lands. The white shroud conceals bloody marks on the crust, transforming the scene of a brutal tragedy into a pristine landscape where there is no room for pity or compassion. Ancient magical grimoires and monotonous shamanic songs never aimed to completely destroy this primal evil. They merely wisely taught how to avoid a fatal encounter and how to protect one's dwelling from the icy gaze of an entity that cannot be killed by ordinary weapons. Somewhere there, in the impenetrable, frightening depths of the northern forests, the pulsating, icy hearts of vanquished monsters still beat beneath heavy stone mounds. They patiently await their new victim, ready at any moment to awaken from slumber and once again bring bloody chaos into the world. The terrible curse of the Wendigo is the most brutal and sobering reminder of the incredible fragility of our vaunted humanity. It proves that the thin veneer of culture disappears without a trace when we are left alone with merciless nature and our own dark instincts. Should the temperature drop by several tens of degrees and an empty stomach painfully contract, the mask of civilization falls without a trace. At that moment, the primal beast awakens in a human, ready to commit the most terrible crime for another day of life. This insidious spirit never comes to those who are strong-willed and maintain clarity of mind even in a hopeless situation. It always seeks broken, desperate, weak souls whose despair serves as ideal ground for the sprouting seeds of black ice madness. Remember one important thing. Every time we anxiously peer into the dark winter forest, that forest very carefully watches us in return. It assesses our weakness, weighs our fears, and patiently waits for us to make a fatal mistake. The quiet, ominous crunch of a broken branch outside your frozen window might just be a random gust of night wind, or it could signify the beginning of your end, foreshadowing the appearance of an emaciated silhouette with yellow glowing eyes, come to sate its eternal, insatiable hunger. The specific smell of ozone and damp grave earth can suddenly penetrate even through the most modern filters of your air conditioners. It will remind you that ancient horror cannot be hidden behind concrete walls, for the chthonic curse will find its victim wherever chilling fear has settled. The ancient myth has not disappeared. It has merely lurked in the impenetrable shadow of ancient pines. The chthonic spirit still patiently watches us with the empty eye sockets of its deer skull, awaiting that long winter when humanity will once again know true, primal, maddening hunger. If on a dark, moonless winter night you suddenly hear from the snow-covered thicket the painfully familiar voice of a loved one calling your name, never answer. Lock the door more securely, rekindle your saving flame,
and pray that the ice creature bypasses your home.
For when the sinister whisper of the icy wind finally dies down, dissolving without a trace into the dense, frosty darkness, you will clearly understand the terrible truth. You will be utterly alone, face to face with your most primal fear, and that gruesome creature whose cursed name is strictly forbidden to utter aloud.